Okay, welcome to session number 4 about arrays and for each loops. We will use all the knowledge we have used so far, and we will go a step further. And as we already know, we need this stuff from yesterday and from last time, and we will need all the stuff we are going to use today every time in the future, because most of our applications will use arrays, will use for loops, and we will use for each loops. As in a general, this is like very C# stuff, and the knowledge you'll learn today, you probably can use in many different programming languages as well. That's why I will talk about some basic stuff, and I'm focusing on, of course, C# programming. Sometimes, so probably just listen and look what I wouldn't program with me, because I'm just comparing some stuff. Sometimes when we declare some variables in C#, we would probably write like int number 1, I'm just declaring some stuff, and int number 2, for instance, or we can declare a variable like string name, of course, as we know, or string name 1 and string name 2, probably. As I said, just listen and watch what I'm doing, probably just that you see why do we use arrays in the first place and why are they so important. If we declare a variable in C#, we know, as in most programming languages, we have to declare them in the very beginning. Declaration always means we reserve memory on our computer, or in other words, sometimes it's called allocate. We allocate memory. And this is called, as I said, a declaration, which will be very important afterwards. At this step, okay, so what I'm talking about is not that very important, but you will see in the future, declarations and definitions and all the different stuff is very important to understand. So if we declare a variable, we can declare many variables, and we know we can declare number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. But what if I want to declare a container of numbers? I, for instance, want to have like 10 numbers or 12 numbers or 100 numbers in one container. And I don't want to declare number 1, int number 2, int number 3, and so on until int number 100. I don't want to declare all of these variables. I just want to declare one container of numbers. For instance, 100 numbers or 10 numbers or 3 numbers. And how can we do that? And that's called an array. For all programming languages, it's called an array. And how do we create an array? The main sign that we use arrays is squared brackets. That's an array. So if we want to create, and now I'm sure you can program with me already. If we want to create a container which has only integers inside, we write int square brackets numbers, and then in C#, this would be like for all or kind of all programming languages, but in C# we write new int, and then we use square brackets again. Very important, square brackets. For instance, we create 3 numbers. 3. An array always tells me, okay, I wanna create a fixed amount of data where each item is the same data type. So I create a container which contains 3 integers, and The first is an integer, the second one is an integer, and the third one is an integer. It's very important that I'm consistent about my data type. So it's a container, and the container's name is numbers. So, and if I look at my container numbers, the first position of my array is array or numbers at the position 0. That's the first position of my container. So if I want to access my first number in my container, it's always the array name and then position 0. So with arrays, we always begin with 0. So counting has very important meaning, beginning with 0. So the first one is numbers at the position 0. The second position is array at the position 1. That's the second one. Array second position is array at the position 1. And the third one, for instance, is third position of my array is numbers at the position 2. So it's very important to understand arrays always begin at the position 0, because 0 always means the first position. Okay, so that's an example of an array for integers. But how can we make an array of strings? It's kind of the same in C# because C# is very well structured, and we can write an array of names like string. We tell computer, okay, we want to create an array, and we can probably use plural word like names, for instance. So new string and the amount, for instance, I can create 5 names here, like 5. And of course, I can make other stuff as well, like I can make double arrays, I can make whatever. In the future, we will create game character arrays, we will create zombie arrays, we will create different stuff in computer games, because we have to have a different amount of items. So in the very beginning, we have to stick to the data types which are usable in all programming languages. But in the future, we can create our own data types, which is object orienting. And then it's just amazing. So double, of course, maybe weights or something, because probably we will use doubles here. So just to show you how we create arrays in C#, which is kind of the same in all programming language. In Java, it would look exactly the same in Java, for instance. But always be advised to understand the first position is numbers at the position 0, or names at the position 0, or weights at the position 0. So a very important step is, after declaring my arrays, to initialize my arrays, to get values into my array. For instance, I want to read in stuff. And I can, of course, use console.writeLine, maybe writeLine. I would just look again, what should I be doing? And then you can do it in a very easy way. The first version is just a stupid way, just to show what we really have to do. And then we will develop a more nicer, neater way, a more advanced way. So first of all, maybe give me your first number. As I said, just have a look and just look what I'm doing and understand why this is stupid. Okay, but just it's working, but it's stupid. Okay, so that's what console, give me a first number. And of course, I could write we know, for instance, like console, I would just begin like I should begin as a student, console write line. Okay, console write line. I convert my console write line into an integer, as we know. Console, no, console convert, so convert to int 32, like this. And we convert it. Here we go. And we want to save it at the position, for instance, at the position numbers at the position 0. That's possible. And we can save it. So, of course, I can copy those 2 lines and adapt it to my usage. Like, give me your first number, give me your second number. As I said, this will be deleted afterwards. I just want to show the emergence, like the development, how we use loops and arrays at the same time. Of course, this should be understandable what I'm doing. I'm just using console write line, and then I save my input, or like my input from my keyboard, into my container at a certain position. First position 0, second position 1, third position 2. And of course, there is no numbers at the position 3. There is nothing like this. If I want to access numbers at the position 3, I will get a memory out of bounds error, a memory error, because there is nothing like numbers at the position 3, because 3 would mean the fourth position. I don't have 4. I only have 3 items. So this is working. Of course, this is working. And if I test this stuff, I probably get some, hopefully not an error, but let's see what's happening. I just get my input here, and just to visualize what's happening, give me a first number, 34, second number, 55, blah, 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 77, and that's it. So all those 3 numbers are saved and stored in my container. But the stupid thing is, what happens if I don't have 3 numbers, not 3 game characters, not maybe I have like 100 enemies, 100 zombies, whatever. That's just useless to copy all the stuff 100 times. What's happening if I just all of a sudden have just 90 and it's not working anymore? That's why we have to combine the knowledge from last week to the knowledge from today and use loops. Loops and arrays are very neat to use at the same time. So that's why I just uncomment stuff, and I can do that like this, uncommenting it, like slash and star and slash. Can be very hard sometimes. But now I want to do the same stuff with loops. I want to do the same stuff with loops. And how can we do that? Doing the same stuff with loops, you know, okay, we have already known we can use different kind of loops. The first loop we have already discussed was the for loop. The for loop always means I know from before how many times I want to compute something. And I know how many times I want to compute something, because if I deal with numbers, I want to compute this stuff 3 times. So I can create a for loop which asks me 3 times. So we know in order to use a for loop, we will always use a counter. And a counter, if I don't really want to exaggerate this stuff, we always have to use I as a counter. We can use, of course, something else. We can write counter, but in all programming languages, we would always use I as a counting variable. And if we want to create a for loop which does stuff 3 times, we know it from last time, we have to initialize the I at 0. Then we tell the counter how long are we going. It's going as long as we're smaller or less than 3. And the last position was how fast are we counting up. That's the main header of the for loop. In order to use the for loop, we always use curly brackets. We will always use curly brackets in C, in C++, in C#, in Java, in many other languages. We would always use exactly the same like the same container or like the same structure to use a for loop. As we know from last week, I really advise, if you have difficulties to understand those 3 items, please go back to last week and try to understand what's happening in here. It's very important that you understand this is the starting position, this is the end position, and this is the how fast am I counting up position. So I want to do something like 3 times. What I'm going to do, I want to ask 3 times something. I want to ask, for instance, give me your number, not the first, not the second, not the blah. I want to just ask in the beginning, give me your number. Of course, I want to change it afterwards a bit nicer, but just to test it, I want to compute something with give me your number. I will just test it, that I can see that my computer is calculating or printing give me your number 3 times. But I want to, of course, afterwards, I want to use something similar, kind of similar, like this, but not numbers at the position 0 or numbers at the position 1 or 2. I want to use the advantage of for loops with the advantage of arrays. As we know from this example from before, and that's why I used it, array, the position always will begin at 0. Then it will go to 1, and then it will go to 2. So if I look at my for loop now, I can see that I will change automatically at the same position. So I will begin with 0, then I will be 1, and then I will be 2. So I will do exactly that what I want to do. So I can write, instead of 0, 1, or 2, I can use I. And I means it begins with 0, then it does all this crap, jumps up again, then it increments it, then its I is 1, then it does the same stuff again, then numbers at the position 1, then it increments I again, it does, okay, I is 2, then it checks, okay, as long I is less than 3, which is true, then it jumps down, and then I is 3, and then it says 3 is not less than 3, please jump out. So it does exactly the same what we want to do. And that's a very, very important step for us. As you can see, what happens now, actually, it happens the same stuff from before, but much, much more intelligent than before, and much nicer if we have a higher amount of number. So 12, for instance, 33, 44. So first thing we want to change here, of course, I want to maybe use, give me your first number, give me your second number, give me your third number. An easy way to do it is, of course, using something which has my I in it, because I begins with 1, then it's I begins with 0, then it's 1, then it's 2. So if I, for instance, give me your, I could do something like this just to check and tell you what's happening. So here, give me your number. There you go. And so if you understand the for loop already, you would understand what will be the output. The output here would be, give me your 0 number, give me your 1 number, give me your second number, which is crap, but it leads us to the solution. So give me your 0 number, blah, blah, blah. So the only thing I have to do is, instead of using I can use I plus 1, which looks a bit cryptic at this time, but of course makes it much nicer. Here we go. And of course, there are many ways to do such stuff, but it's like, that's one of the easiest stuff. Give me a first number. Here we go. 77, 88. Some of you probably understood already why I plus 1. And here we can use, we use the variable I in many, many different ways. We use it in many, many different ways. So we can do the same stuff for instance, we can do the same stuff for strings, of course. So if I want to use names, and I will show you another improvement to this. I will show you another improvement. So of course, I can use a for loop again. That's what I do in most cases. I just copy for loops. I copy for loops, just the header, because I will always begin with 0 again. And now I want to deal with my string array names. I will work with string array. So instead of writing, as I know my names, my array of names contains 5 names. So for most of you guys, if I write 5, this is working. But in some occasions, I can write something else. I can write, for instance, I want to create something which is working automatically, which gives me more power to use my programming languages, which will be very important afterwards. And for instance, I can, instead of using 5, because 5 is what's 5? 5 is the size of the array. So I can use something which has something like the size. It's called size in most programming languages, not in C#. In C# it has another meaning, but it's something else. So I can write, instead of writing 5, of course I can write 5, but in many occasions, it will be better to use names dot length. And if you're using Visual Studio, you probably get length automatically suggested because you can use length. And then the name, the size, or the length of your array is 5. So instead of using 5, you can automatically use the array name and then dot length, which makes it much better if you have different kind of arrays and you don't want to look it up. How big is my array? Or you have something which is interactive and you don't want to think about, is this 5? Is it 7? Is it 8? If you copy this stuff, okay, and you copy, maybe you copy it here and you write numbers dot length, it will always work. And if you copy this structure, you don't have to think about for loops anymore, because you get used to such loops very fast, and you just copy and copy and copy all the for loops. I remember when I was a student, the first time I was using for loops, it was a bit tricky. And then I just used my same setup for for loops all the time. And I really got acquainted with for loops very fast. And that's why it's so perfect. So I can use, instead of using the length, or instead of using a number for the length, I can use the array name dot length. Length will be size of in many programming languages. In most programming languages, size tells me how long an array is. I don't know why they use length in C#. That's kind of a bit strange, but otherwise it's okay. So I can copy, of course, I can copy this line, I can copy it and give me your first blah, blah, not number, name maybe, give me your first name. And if I want to read my stuff, I can probably just use this line again and change it to my usage. Numbers 1, not numbers. I can use names, of course, and I don't have to convert my stuff. As we know, console.readline works for strings already. So I get as a return value, I get a string. So I don't have to convert this stuff. So I can use this to use and to get input, or like to create an input for an arbitrary amount of strings. This code would look kind of the same for most programming languages. So if you are able to write this code, you will have no difficulty at all to understand or write another programming language, to use another programming language, because it will be kind of the same. That's why it's so important. Okay, so if we test the stuff, if we test it, next step, I'll show you many steps today. Okay. Testing. My computer is a bit slow sometimes, so I'm sorry. Let's see what's happening. 34, 45, blah, blah. Okay, but first name, second name, blah, 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 blah. Good. So the first step in an array is always creating array. Second step is always getting values into my array. Then in most cases, we have to do an operation with the array. We do something, we search something, we sort something, whatever. And the last step is, in most occasions, is printing the array. So I will jump over the middle step, because the middle step is the advanced step. I will show how we can print an array in different ways. If we would use Python here, Python is very easygoing. In most programming languages, we have to show a bit more effort than in Python or like in JavaScript, but it's very worth the try. So how to print an array? So the first step is how do we get values into my array? Then most of the cases we do something. And how do we print an array? How do we print an array? All the stuff I show you now is very important for all programming languages, because it shows us ways to print stuff in a very algorithmic way or in a very easy way. And I show you 2 different versions. And in some weeks, we will know like 4 different versions already. So how do we print an array? The first thing I really can suggest is always copying my for loop. I just copy my for loop. I copy it, because if my for loop worked before, it's probably working again. It's very important step for a programmer. Just reuse your code if you know this stuff is working. So just use it again. So I use it again. I use the for loop again. That's the first step, because I know this for loop was working perfectly for my numbers. I want to print all my items in my array. So how can we do that? The for loop iterates through all the items in my array. So the only thing I have to do is not very difficult, but also very important to show. Like, the only thing I have to do, like basically, is to access each item. And each item is numbers at the position That's each item, because I begins again with 0, iterates all the time, and gives me all the values. So if I use it, if I want to use it afterwards, let's see, first number 45, 55, 66, blah, 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 blah. And then it prints out all the values which are inside of my array. And of course I can write, of course I can pimp this stuff again. I can write, okay, and the first and the number is, I can begin with this again. And of course I can use, like before, I can use I plus 1 to, and the first number was blah, blah, blah. So don't forget the plus at the beginning. In Python, it would be a bit different, but kind of the same, but just a bit. And of course, I can pimp my output, of course, like we always have to do. But in the first place, it's always important that you understand how to print the stuff. As we know, this code is working for all programming languages. For all programming languages, even though in Python you could use a for loop and you could access all your stuff, everything. But C# is a very intelligent programming language. That's why they created an extra version of a loop, which makes it much easier to print out some stuff. It can be useful for many different scenarios, but especially when printing lists or arrays or different kind of stuff, it is very useful. And it's called a so-called for each loop. That's why the new input, which will make exactly the same, it's called a for each loop. And the for each loop looks in the beginning very similar like a for loop. I just use this, and it will generate exactly the same output like before. I just want to show how for each works. And in this example, probably it doesn't make so much difference to use a for loop or a for each loop. But if you have a container with many different kinds of stuff, a for each can be very, very useful and will be very useful. So how do we write for each loop to print out all the stuff? That's why I can show it here. I use for each loops most of the time for printing stuff. Many people I know who are much better programmers than I am, they are using for each for kind of everything. But I use it like this. I use, for instance, int I, or for int I in numbers. I can write the syntax as that we can see. I not write k, maybe I write k. So n, maybe n is nicer. Int n in numbers, and then we can of course like this, copy it again, and the number is, and here we get, just to show you, it will be the same output, but it will generate, the code is completely different. So int n, I just called it n, okay, I can call it whatever I want. Int n in numbers, especially if I have long lists or long arrays, it will be making any sense. And console write line, and the number is. So to show you the difference, the code is very different from each other in my perspective, but it will generate the same output. And in this scenario, okay, the first glimpse how a for each loop looks like, it can be a bit strange, but if you use it in a long time of area, like a longer time, you probably will see how wonderful this is. So I just see, okay, 35, blah, blah, and then bam, 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 bam. So and then 34, 34, 31, and it generates exactly the same output. A for each loop was originally generated in Java, and most of the program languages, they said, that's really nice stuff, so let's steal it. So C# stole it from Java, and all the other programming languages stole it from Java as well, or from C#. So most programming languages need this stuff. So I can use this, of course. I can use this to print out my name arrays as well. Print it out again. For I is 0, I smaller than, for instance, I copy names length, and I can write, and the name was number names. And if I want to use a for each version to print out the names, I can write for not int n, I can write, for instance, string x, maybe. I will write object, because in programming languages, most of the times you will write like object, also not object, and not in C#. I'm not allowed to use object. I can write O, for instance. String in, or maybe I can use object in names. So, and console write line, I can use. Now I'm allowed to use object. Sorry, I didn't know. String object in names, blah blah blah. So, and here I can write object. I only can suggest that you get used to write for each loops at the same time as for loops, and understand the difference, and show it performance. The performance of a for each loop is faster than a for loop. So you try, if you really have performance issues, you shouldn't stick to for loops. So you should write for each loops. But the problem is you don't find for each loops in C. You will never find a for each loop in an airplane, in a printer, in a computer, in a scanner. So you have to write for loops, and a for loop will always work. It doesn't matter if it's a sensor or an aeroplane, but for each loop only will work if you use like a display, a mobile phone, stuff which uses more advanced programming languages. So you should always have understanding of both, because you can do the same stuff with both. I know people, they don't like for each, they only use for loops. And I know people who only use for each, but they are only programmers in C# or Java or other programming languages. So they always try to use this. If we want to do something with our array, so something in between, I can, as an input, as a first step, I can show you some stuff which is very easy and very nice. For instance, we can sort our stuff. So if we have arrays, if we have created arrays, we can sort our stuff. I want to sort my numbers. So I can write, for instance, numbers dot, and then I can look if I find something. Is there something I can use? No, but I can write, for instance, sort. I can write sort like this. I can write like this, and then normally I should advise how can I use for sort. Yeah, but here it's not working. Oh, strange. Then I can show you how it works. Sort. Normally in my Visual Studio, it suggests me automatically what I can use. Numbers. And I have to use something like this, quick fix. Program result. Yeah, that's working. Now it's working, the strange stuff. Okay, I show you the normal way. If I wouldn't know how to sort an array in C#, I would Google it. Okay, but that's just a bit strange because my Visual Studio here is just behaving differently. I just wanted to show. Okay, okay, what should we do? I would just Google. Okay, sort C#, C# array, and then I would find something like a library and a function which is called sort, and there's like an example, blah blah blah, and here I can write something. Okay, here I see something. Okay, array.sort. But the very important step is, in most cases, I would just copy it, okay, because I understand. Okay, what are they doing? Okay, they're doing kind of the same what I do. Okay, I copy it. Okay, I copy it like this and use it, for instance, for numbers. But if my Visual Studio is very intelligent, and hopefully it is, it includes automatically a library. And this library, if it's not here, my library, in most cases, you wouldn't find the library. It can be it when you guys sit at home that it's not working. So then you just have to press something like here or somewhere like here, because when I used from sort before, it showed me that there's a quick fix. And that's the advantage of using Visual Studio, because it shows me, probably you want to sort your array. So please use blah, blah, blah. And the cool thing with Visual Studio in addition is, if it really thinks you have to use this library, this function, it will suggest it and it will include your stuff up there. And we will see it in many occasions that we are asked how we can use it. So it's a very good thing that we can use in Visual Studio. So array.sort, and here we type in the numbers. And of course, we can use the same code, array dots, and you can see with C# you get a lot of different functionality when you type array dot. And when you use dot, you can already see some stuff, clear or search or reverse and whatsoever. Very cool stuff. But in the beginning, we begin with sort, and I can write sort, of course, names as well. I can write it. And I only can suggest here at this point, if you want to do your own sorting stuff, you have to do it yourself. If you want to really stick to this sorting stuff, which makes you happy in most occasions, it's perfect. But sometimes if you want to do it in another way, if your company says, no, you have to sort this stuff in a different way or search for it in a different way, then you have to think about it, how you can do it. So it's like if you test this stuff again, test it. We're perfect on time. Good. You can already, and if you really like the functionalities, you can already begin using array dot, because array dot has many different functionalities which I can use, and that's a perfect thing. So it tells me my numbers are sorted afterwards. It tells me my names are sorted afterwards. So the last thing as an introduction to arrays is, so what happens if I want to create something which changes the size? So if I create an array, and that's the most important message. If I create an array, it has a fixed size. Arrays mean it has a fixed size. It cannot be changed afterwards. So after the point when I created this array, I cannot change the size. That's why it's called static. It's called static, statisch in German, or statisk in Norwegian. It's called static. It cannot be changed afterwards. And of course, we have many scenarios where we have to change the amount of data, but then we don't use arrays. Arrays we only use if we have a fixed amount of data and we don't want to change it. So if I want to compute, if I want to create an application now where I want to ask how many numbers do you want to, how many numbers do you have? How many names do you have? Then of course I will create that in the beginning. Of course, I would use that in the very beginning. I would write, give me how many numbers do you have? Or how many names do you want to put in your array? But I can write how many numbers do you have? For instance, I can write it. And I created my array of numbers already. I created it already because I was the person who said declarations should be in the very beginning. But in this scenario, it doesn't make any sense to create the array before and then we ask how many items does my array have. So in this scenario, the step of declaration before my question is stupid. So I will get, of course, the numbers, the amount. Maybe I can call it amount. This is like this, amount. Maybe I just call it amount. In mathematics, I would call it n, but I just call it amount. And I would write amount equals, and I can use this line because we use it. Then I get how many numbers do you want to have in my container. But at this step, after this step, I can create my array. Because if I want to use my array like here, the array here has a fixed amount of 3. So I cannot change it anymore. So this is useless. So that's why I have to cut it out. And after my steps here, after here, for instance, 35, I can create my array and not with the size of 3 or 4 or 5, with the size of amount. And that's one of the rare scenarios where declarations happen in the middle of a code. Normally, and in 95% of all occasions, you probably have your declarations in the very beginning because you want to have all your ingredients in the beginning. But in some occasions, like when you have to do something in a static way, but you have to create it afterwards, then you really have to create it afterwards. Yeah, question. Does the read line need to be in a subsequent line after to understand which write line it belongs to? Yeah, it's after this line. How many numbers do you want to have? The next step the computer does is computing the next line. So this should be in the next line because otherwise I don't get any input for it. Yeah, yeah. But the very important step here is because this is very important for C++, for Unreal engines, or for Unity game developers, or for mobile applications in C# or Azure, Xamarin, whatever. This step is very important because in many occasions we have to create something static, like a display, like amount of data which cannot be changed. But sometimes we have to use interaction before we can create it. If we wanna ask how many players are playing Smash Bros. Pro, whatever, then first we ask how many players are there, but then we create an array of the players, and the players will be consistent during the whole game. And that's why we use arrays, and it makes stuff much easier than using dynamic stuff. And dynamic means I can change it all the time. So this time I can use numbers, blah, blah, blah. So I can use, of course, I can use numbers.length, which is always very useful. But of course, I could use in this occasion, I could also use amount. Of course, I could use amount. So this is possible, but I would never use amount. I would always use numbers.length, because then I don't have to think about it. I don't have to think about it, how big the size is. So the last input for today, which is possible now, is like last time, we wanted to create the average of numbers. And we ask, okay, how many numbers do we want to have? Then I create my array. And last time we didn't have arrays, but now we want to create the average of all the numbers in my container, in my array. So as we probably know or remember from last time, we needed a variable which was called double sum. And this was a declaration. And we already defined it and initialized it with 0. You probably remember from last time that initializing is very important, because the computer has to understand where do we begin. This was very important. Then we know we created a variable like average as well. We don't have to initialize this. And I want to create my array not of integers. I want to use commas as well. So I create like commas here. So doubles, I want to use doubles. So of course, but the rest is just fine. Give me the number, blah, blah, blah. I save it here. And the main algorithm, like we were talking about last week, was how to generate an average. And the average is one of the first algorithms you have to understand. What's an algorithm? Algorithm is like a procedure. And what's the average? The average takes all the items, sums them up, and then divides them by the size. So as you remember from last week, we had sum plus equals. And where was the actual number? The actual value of the number was sum plus equals numbers at the position I. Because I wanna sum up all the items, all the numbers in my container. I want to sum up. Of course, there's always the question, is there like a minus equals? Of course, there's a minus equals as well. Is there like a multiplied equals? Of course, there's this one as well. So in game development, we often need minus equals, because health points and stuff, you can just you easily use them with minus equals. So if we use this, then all the items, all the numbers in my container are summed up and put into one variable, which is my sum. They put into them. And after the for loop is finished, after this is finished, I have a complete sum of numbers. I have the complete sum of numbers. So in order to calculate the average, I would type average sum divided by whatever. I don't know the amount anymore. I don't know the number, if it's 3 or 4 or 5. So I can use whether I can use numbers length, which I would use probably numbers.length. Here we go. Which most of the programming language, most of the programmers will use. And of course, some people, and I understand why, some people would use amount as well. And of course, if you want to use amount, you don't have to use parentheses. But yeah, I learned it. I learned it with the size or length of functionality. But of course, I understand if you want to use it like this. And of course, if you want to print it out, you would use something with console write line at this position. We can do that. We have some minutes off, so we can use it to type in the average. Give me average. The average is whatever, and I will press average, which will work, of course. And the mixture and the combination between for loops and arrays are so popular that you really have to exercise stuff. You really have to exercise, and you have to get used to it. And it doesn't matter if you're working in C++, Java, C# whatsoever, you will always see the same scenario. So do coders ever use different increments than one? Yes. Yes, sometimes they use different increments. For instance, if you have really special applications where you just jump over 5 all the time, like 5, 0, 5, 0, 5, 0, then you can use that as well. But in a for loop, most of the time, you would always just use I++, but you could always create your own jumper. Yeah, and for instance, I could make something which is a very good example, a very good question as well. I can make another counter like this, and I can set it to 0, and I just wanted to jump it like 10, 20, 30, whatever, or like 5. Let's make it something different, and then I can write in the for loop. In the for loop, I can write counter plus equals 5, which tells my counter every time I'm finished in my loop, it should add 5. So 5, 10, 15, whatsoever. But some people try to mix it then here in the for loop as well. I would never as a programmer mix it in the header of the for loop. In the header of the for loop, I would always step 1 step. But you can jump 5 steps wherever you want. So if you have something you want to step 7 steps, you then press here, or you have to count down, you make a countdown, then of course you can make a counter which begins with 100 and counts down 10 or 7 or whatever. So, but the basic structure for the for loop should always be the same. And of course you can write your stuff in here as well, but in 99% of the cases, you probably would never see anything else. But of course, there are scenarios where you want to count 5 or 10 or 8. Okay. So I just stopped the recording. I'm open for questions now as well. And that's the first step for arrays. And perfect. So it looks good.